So we are supply chain management platform, a software platform specializing on ESG risk management, specializing on supply chain transparency. And before we go on the journey, maybe what I'm doing at IntegrityNext, I'm part of the sustainability expert team. We are taking a look at the different regulation. We are taking a look at different ESG perspectives, and then we break it down. We break it into digestible pieces. Then we explain it to our customers and, of course, to our product managers, because we have to derive some products from that. And this is a really strong focus from us. So we are also heavily into capacity building, because especially in this topic, it really matters. But let's jump right into it, from risk to resilience. So before we go on this journey, we first need to start at compliance, and therefore we need a status quo. We need a small reality check. Then we also see this in a case study where we are enabling one of our customers to have this value-driven due diligence approach. We go through that step by step so you can see how this can be integrated. And then we're taking a look on the whole journey. So from compliance over due diligence all the way to resilience. All right, first off, ESG regulatory reality check. So regulatory pressure may fluctuate, supply chain risk does not. Fluctuate, it's a very nice word, a very euphemistic word. You think about maybe a river that is flowing. The reality is a little bit more grim because regulatory uncertainty is real. We're not sugarcoating this. There are several factors. So in the EU, we had this omnibus discussions. We had like this political backlash. We're talking about regulations, for example, like this CSDDD that were cut down. We're talking about delays. We also saw some national divergences here. So we were always seeing this on a political scale. We saw parties teaming up with other parties so that they teamed up even with the far right groups. So this was a huge political backlash. On the other hand, we also see different dynamics in the EU versus the US. So we have these two power blocks that were drivers of sustainability before diverging a little bit. And where does that lead at our customer base, especially for larger companies? It led to a strategic hesitation. So companies really took a look and say, okay, let's be conservative here. We wait a little bit until the storm is settling. But we also discovered, and this would be good if politicians would know that, is that not the regulation is the problem, but it's unpredictability. So it's not about heavy bureaucracy or that it's hard to implement. It is about this uncertainty. When will it happen? How big is the scope? And this ups and down. And this is really the problem we identified. Transferring this towards the ESG landscape, we discovered that a kind of a ESG fatigue. Where does it come from? It comes from a reporting overload. It comes from different checklists that needs to be followed. Everybody tried to have this kind of one-size-fits-all approaches. From a supplier side, we have to have this nice word of assessment fatigue, of too many information requests for the suppliers, and they were overwhelmed by so many ESG assessments. However, we still see that there's relevance. Everybody needs supply continuity. We have a great deal of cost volatility, and also, of course, the reputational risks. Even though it was political driven, there was also a huge backlash from the public and also from NGOs regarding this pullback from ESG regulations. Speaking of this political pushback, of course, this does not reduce the risk. It's still prevalent. So there's still forced labor. There's still deforestation. We also saw there's still horrible climate events, geopolitical shocks, and so on. And now the regulatory pressure is a little bit fading. And what we see, the risk is increasingly commercial. So we have commercial and actual market impacts. So we have import bans. There's a big customer pressure. We have investor scrutiny when we're talking about green markets. And also market access in general when it comes to product compliance. So the risk is increasingly commercial, it's not just regulatory, and therefore we have to look at how we can apply this in practice to have also these commercial benefits. And for that, I brought a small case study. We had to anonymize this. So we're talking about company A. It's a big chemical company. 15.2 billion revenue in 2024. Over 9,200 products, 32 employees in over 110 nations. And they located their due diligence in their procurement department. And here we are talking about over 400 people in this global organization, and they have to monitor around 30,000 suppliers. So quite a challenge. So they approached us with their situation and some of the pain points. So what did they approach us with? So they said, of course, the regulatory demand is increasing. Yeah, I know this sounds a little bit contradictory to what I said before, but we see that the regulatory pressure is not actually decreasing, it's more fragmenting. You have to deal with a lot of different regulations. We also saw this at the Vorwerk presentation. I think it was around 16 or went over to 16 different regulations they have to cover. And this is very interesting, they also want to have a value-based standard towards their supplier base. So this will be a very crucial phrase. What they also wanted, not just a system that works, they also wanted to also gain efficiency from that system within their procurement department. And because it is a big company, they needed to scale this. They want to make this globally available. So they also want to integrate this into their ERP system so they can distribute the information quite well. And also very important, they want to have a low hurdle for suppliers. So they have this global supplier base, and supplier information is key, so you have to set the bar for information request very low, so suppliers can participate in that. So we gave them the solution with our up-to-date questionnaires with regards to the different regulations, but also to a value-based approach. And in terms of efficiency gains, we try to structure our platform as easy as possible. It's very easy to understand. It comes in different languages. And of course, we also are strong in parts of the API integration. In this case, it was towards the SAP system. And when it comes to the low hurdles of suppliers, we are not charging additional costs for suppliers. So we created this supplier network. It's a little bit similar like a social media network where suppliers can create a profile and upload their ESG data there. It's all standardized, it's all free, and they can distribute the information towards their customers. In terms of project roadmap, and this is kind of the go-to project roadmap you can go, but you can also individualize this a bit. But what they did right, they had this kind of prolonged starting phase where they really set out the scope, where they really had an identification of their processes. They set also thresholds and evaluation criteria. So they also came up with KPIs, also with measurable KPIs, because if those KPIs are not met, you will see this in the later phases, you have to change the process, and that's completely okay. We live in a volatile world, so you kind of want to measure it constantly and you want to change it. So this is twice here. Maybe I update the presentation when I send it out. So the next point in the execution phase is the integration into the existing processes. So how can you fit it within the existing tools? I talked about the integration into the SAP system, but there are also other tools like Power BI and so on, where you want to integrate your data so that it's becoming distributable over your whole company. And after that, they started the full rollout. So they didn't do this step by steps, but they really started the full rollout. They started the global application, and over 10,000 suppliers were evaluated in their first iteration. Of course, after that, they did some adjustments in terms of scope and also additions towards the solution. So they were tailoring this to their specific categories. They also included product compliance issues once they had onboarded their suppliers. And then we enter the refinement phase. And here, because we're also developing new solutions, it's also important to take a look at the newest development and also integrate this into your process and also use these new features within this whole due diligence project. So when we take a look on what made this a success. So first of all, we were able to tailor the solution to the needs of the customers. So it's very important to have this flexible solution. We're going to see that later in the presentation. What they also did right is that they set clear expectation and also communicated these expectations within the organizations. Of course, if those expectations are not met or if the regulatory landscape changes, you have to redefine your goals and your needs. What they also did well is, like I said, they cooperated on the additional features. So there was an easy implementation phase of new features we developed. And very important, for internal and external communication, they emphasized how much how big the value added is of those products regarding a value added to the business itself. And this is a good transition to what comes next, because now we're taking a look on the road from compliance to resilience. And this goes all over the way of business value. Because when the regulatory pressure is slightly diminishing, it's not that bad, because it also creates a window of opportunity. Because we saw a lot of companies who did really the regulatory minimum. However, that's not possible anymore. Now we can move to strategic design. What does that mean? So it really opens up the opportunity for more flexibility. So what you can do, you can really focus on your material topics. You can address the demands of external stakeholders, and I'm not just talking political stakeholders, but customers, markets, investors, and so on. So you have to map your stakeholders, and then you think, okay, what are the demands? How can we meet them from an ESG perspective? And then it's about to transform your due diligence into a real business value drivers, or in business terms, it's ROI. So how can due diligence actually be a driver? So there are many dimensions. We won't dive into all of them, but just to give you an overview. So on the top left corner, we have operational efficiency. Of course, you can create joint initiatives to reduce waste, energy use, resource consumptions, and so on. With that, improving your productivity and also lowering your operational costs. Speaking of costs, we also summarize this among the cost reductions. So this is about pure saving money when it comes to sustainable sourcing, also energy management, and for example, process optimization through better processes. Then we're talking about revenue growth. So here you can use this as a competitive advantage, not just your ESG-ready products itself, but also if you are dealing with cutting-edge technology in this field, you have this head start when it comes to either market access or new products or new technology. But what we really want to focus today is business resilience. And here it's really the planning for climate or supply chain risk to really continue and protect long-term value. So when we jump into this, we first have to differentiate between what risk really means versus what resilience really means. Those are connected, so risk lays the kind of the first step before we can enter resilience. So risk really is, or risk management is really about identifying and managing potential threats. So once we did that, we can move towards resilience. So resilience means that you take these assets and really build the capacity to withstand, adapt, and also very important, emerge stronger from that. So you don't want to react all the time, but resilience means that if that happens again, you have a better plan for that, so you emerge stronger from that. Also very important is when we take a look on what data this is founded on, we can see that they have the shared data foundation. So if you have a risk management or you want to transfer it to resilience more, then you can see that you need visibility in your supply chain. You need good supplier master data because this is your data foundation. And then you also need to have these ESG risk data, whether it be country risk data, industry risk data, or geopolitical risk data. So this is your foundation when it comes to supply chain ESG risk data. And then what you want to know is critical material and also the dependencies between those material, between those trade relations, to really understand your supply chain to get from risk to resilience. Another, let's say, smart sentence is that true resilience comes from reducing the exposures, not just reacting when your disruption hits. So we saw this in other presentations. There is a long process before the event that triggers the risk. So this is the part where resilience comes into play, but also the part afterwards is very important, that you learn from the event and that you emerge stronger from that. And when you take a look at your supply chain due diligence process, because a lot of you maybe have implemented a supply chain due diligence process, then you can identify that the levers that is making your supply chain due diligence process effective are the same levers that are also supporting traditional resilience. So when we're taking a look at supply chain due diligence on the right side, you can see there are different processes that are also beneficial for traditional resilience. For example, responsible procurement leads always to flexible contracts. If you have a risk-based supplier prioritization, this is very good for a scenario planning. If you have supply chain transparency, if you have this transparency, then you can go into a stage of early warning because you know your dependencies, you know your supply chain, and you have traceability, which leads to kind of dual sourcing. We saw that one critical aspect was single sourcing. So if you know your supply chain, then you can identify ways of new sourcing strategies. So there are many different levers that can be utilized for both, so for traditional resilience and supply chain due diligence. So this is why we always try to emphasize, if you have a good supply chain due diligence process, use this process to generate value for traditional resilience. And to be flexible in this matter, we created kind of a portfolio of different solutions in our IntegrityNext solution suite that deals with different types of regulations, but also deals with different types of supply chain due diligence topics. So it's not just regulation driven, but it has many dimensions of supply chain due diligence. Last but not least, when we want to build resilience, there are a few points important, and you also want to always be aware of how to benefit from it. So what we learned today, so we learned that resilience emerges when we understand the different dependencies between the different materials, between the different suppliers, because then you can identify those risk hotspots across the tier. And of course, when it comes to ESG, a lot of those risk hotspots, they emerge in the deeper supply chains. It's not necessarily that they emerge in tier 7 or 8. You don't have to go that far. If you take a look at like big supply chains, it's usually at tier 3 or tier 4 where a lot of these supply chain risks are happening because of the interconnection of global supply chains. And then you can derive options before the disruption hits. So we saw some scenario plannings already. I won't go too deep into that. I just want to show you what kind of solution we developed on the right side here. So what we did is we have a solution where you enter your product, and with the help of AI, with large language models and graph neural networks, we were able to split up this product into different materials and also create a supply chain from that, from trade data and from AI data. And then we are able to map different ESG risks towards these suppliers in the supply chain and towards these materials in the supply chain. So when you know that, then you can really derive resilience from that, and then you can start benefiting from this resilience. For example, you have lower disruptions and compliance costs, so you can really make a business case here. You can secure market access and supply continuity. And also you get a stronger trust. I think this was very prevalent in the Schaefer presentation. When you show that you have a resilient supply chain and you think of solutions, you gain the trust of your suppliers and of your customers because you can ship in time, because you know your risk, because you know your supply chain. And this, of course, when we are still talking about volatile markets, it really gives you this long-term competitiveness. So to kind of sum it up with a few very striking words. So what's this journey all about? So when we start with compliance, then we can say compliance keeps you legal, all the way to due diligence that keeps you operational. And the bonus, the cherry on top, is resilience because it keeps you competitive. Next up, we have a small discussion round. So if you want to join our discussion round later, we try to lighten this a little bit up. We want to take away the regulatory pressure. So we ask you, if due diligence were completely voluntary tomorrow, what topics would you engage? Yeah, show us your opinion. You can scan the QR code. Even if you're not coming to our booth, make sure you vote for that. It's always super interesting. I give you a small list you can choose from. But really, I wanted to know. It can also be a personal opinion. I know it's sometimes a little bit hard to differentiate or to choose between different topics, but this is a very good exercise to really think of, okay, if the regulation is the way, what really matters in terms of business, but also in terms of ESG impact. And with that, thank you for your attention. And yeah, I think we do the Q&A in the next part.